the Iron Bowl, one of college football's most intense rivalries. Represents a clash, not just of football teams, but of the cultural pride within the state of Alabama. Who walks the state with their head held high next 365 days? This isn't about rankings or records. When you take the field, remember what this rivalry means. This is the Iron Bowl. This is war.
Does it get any bigger than the Iron Bowl? We have some pretty important people here that can answer that question. Two-time national champion out of Alabama, Damien Harris, and the second overall pick in 2005 out of Auburn, Ronnie Brown. Before we get to our guests, though, we do need to acknowledge our host here in studio, Smoke Dixon, of course, played some football for Alabama and actually went head-to-head.
Be sci-fi.
Yes, sir. Sci-fi. What's going on, baby?
Oh, goodness. This is going to be a fun conversation. We got two Alabama people here, but then, of course, you went up against Ronnie Brown back in the day. There's already been some conversation when we got here today, the discrepancies between what the correct record is. So, Ronnie, I'll let you have the first word here. What do you remember about going up against this guy to my left?
You know what? It was crazy because I didn't know, like, the impact of that game. I'm a Georgia guy. Like, so I grew up in Georgia. And so first time playing in that game, you realize the magnitude of it. You got, kids and people flipping you off coming in the stadium. And so it already threw me off. I'm looking at it like, wait a minute, what's going on? And so playing in that game, it's a different atmosphere. And the one thing I do think that we all agree on is inside the NFL locker rooms, that conversation is this has to be the best rivalry. One, because there's no professional sports in Alabama. But two, it's just the magnitude of that game, what it brings out of people, not even the players. You see the worst of some people during that time. And so I enjoyed it, and that became one of the motivating factors for me, right? Like those were the games that I really enjoyed the most. Like playing in those games, you got the big time game, everybody's watching, it's the rivalry, everybody emotions are up. So I enjoyed it. That was a time to shine. And that was one of the games that we had in our pocket that we called, this is one of those league games, right? Like if you can play well in these games, this can get you to the next level.
Absolutely. Just like B, I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland. So that whole Alabama-Auburn thing, didn't make sense to me until you get into that first game. You're like, whoa, bottles are getting thrown at you after the game. Little kids, like you said, are flicking you off. Everybody hates you. But the crazy thing is, I had a cousin that was at Auburn, and we'll call it Cal College for right now because that's the last time I'm going to respect that.
The pastors.
The pastors. So we're going to say Cal College. So you don't really understand the impact until you get into the game, and you're like, it's here. And my first year in 1999 was the first time Bama had played Cal College down there. So we go in there and we do what we usually do, bust them up, run through them, end the game, and we're singing our song, and we end up in a place that Cal College rarely gets, Atlanta, for the SEC championship.
Let's bring in the young guy to this conversation, Damien Harris. You didn't get to compete with or against either of these guys, but what do you remember about that rivalry during your time at Alabama?
Wow, I just remember a state being divided. I mean, like Ronnie said, there is no pro team. And when you live in the state of Alabama, you either cheer for Alabama football or Auburn football. And there's a lot of households where one side is orange and blue and the other side is crimson and white. So I just remember an entire state that was just, it was like it was divided by a line, and you had to choose your side. There was no half-stepping. There was no straddling the fence. You were either an Auburn guy or you were a Bama guy. And I think that that's what makes the rivalry so great. I mean, all eyes are on those two programs, and there's so many people that pour so much into each university. Again, like Ronnie said earlier, just the emotions are at an all-time high. I mean, you've got kids yelling F you to the other side. I remember walking into Jordan-Hare Stadium, seeing elephants hanging on ropes and stuff. I was like, man, what is going on here? Like, this is crazy. But, kind of like somebody else on this show that played against Auburn a couple of times, we just roughed them up every chance we got. I mean, we knew that Auburn was going to be looking at us like a team where they could make a name for themselves or make a statement, uplifting their season. But we rarely let it happen. And the one time that we did let it happen, unfortunately for us, we made up for it on the back end. We won a national championship that year. I'm pretty sure Auburn lost to UCF that year, and that was when they were claiming to be national champions. But at the end of the day, we knew what it was. We knew that we were the best team. Auburn, they fell short, but it was a great rivalry. It was a great atmosphere to be around, and it was one of those games where if you love football, if you love competing, if you love stepping inside those white lines and proving that you were the best and you could compete against the best, man, that was the game to watch during rivalry week.
So in 2002, we took that L to B, Cadillac, Jason Campbell, and that was a loaded team. That was my last home game at Bryant-Denny. And it hurt us a little bit more because y'all stole Cadillac from us. We had Cadillac all sealed, delivered to come
You
to
don't want to
Tuscaloosa.
talk about stealing recruits. That ain't what we want to talk about on here. That's the definitely thing that we don't want to talk about.
Are we talking about stealing recruits or just out recruiting? Which one? Because there's a difference.
I don't know. It sounds like we were on the winning end of this one, so you might want to ask your sci-fi brother right there.
Listen. You guys figured a way in the 11th hour to go up there, take them away from us. How you guys did that, we don't know. But we just know that the LAC showed up in the LAC down there at Jordan-Hare, and he started running the ball at a high level. But in 2002, both you guys were out. So we went into that game thinking like, you know what? We're about to blow these guys out. And it always happens when you take that game not expecting Auburn to come out there and fight. You guys came out there and kicked our faces in just because, just the rivalry part of it. All those guys from the state of Alabama, we had the better team in that year, but you guys had the better players that played with that much like this attitude. Jason was connecting all the passes. Trey was out there running through us. And we expected Lack and B to be out here. Who's this dude running all over us? And we went home.
Yeah,
and I was
that's how it happened. But when you look at it, I mean, I don't think Auburn, we're not the sexy team in Alabama. Like, right? You look at the history of what Tuscaloosa has been. We've never been, that we're just that hard-nosed team. That's kind of how we're built. We're not usually the most talented. We're rarely favored to win that game. And so I think I like the mindset of that. It's against all odds. You look at a situation in 2002, where Cadillac gets hurt, then I get hurt in the Georgia game and leading into the Alabama game. And then we got a guy, Trey Smith, who, was Mr. Florida, Mr. Football in Florida. So, was a very talented guy. He comes in, he has that mindset. And so it was just next man up. And I think it's a mindset that's taken, and we always feel like we can win that game, And so, unfortunately, historically, a lot of times we don't necessarily get the top recruits. They are surprised when we do. You can hear Smokey talking about, oh, man, we should have gotten this guy. We don't do moral victories at Auburn, so it is what it is. And, just go out, you put your jersey on, you go play. You get your hard hat, you get your work pill, and let's get it done.
I love these competitors, too. You guys are bringing up the loss that you experienced against the other team, because that's the one that is what really sticks with you. Ronnie, I'm curious from your perspective on the Auburn side of things, what's the lead up to this game like? How is it different than the other games on your schedule that season?
Yeah, well, I think that's a week where there's certain games on the schedule and the calendar. Alabama's obviously one of those games. Georgia was that for me, being a kid from Georgia, and a lot of guys from my hometown, being Georgia fans. But that's a game that week. Say, man, coaches shouldn't have to coach you this week, right? Like the motivation. If you need motivation, you need speeches and all of that. You're in the wrong sport because we know what we're getting. It's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight for 4 quarters. Whoever wins the game is going to be physically busted up or beat up the next week. And so just enjoying that part of it and saying, okay, listen, this is what true competition is about, right? The rivalry, the build-up to it, the fan involvement, the trash talking, sometimes the extracurricular with the fan base. It's just all things that you want about college football, all in one, impacted in a week. And then going into the game, obviously the bragging rights, that's a year-long thing. That carries over to other seasons, basketball season, all of those things. And so you just know what that game means to not only you as a player, to the coaching staff, but also to the state. And it goes beyond that. And usually outside the state of Alabama, people recognize, the significance of that game, the Iron Bowl, and what it means to college football.
Yeah, the Iron Bowl meant a ton to us because we're coming at the end of the season, and we always had the LSU, Mississippi State, Auburn game. Just 3 headbangers that you knew was going to be a physical matchup. And you had to go out there in order to go through the SEC and end up in Atlanta. You had to go through all those 3 schools. And even if Auburn wasn't the top school at that point, you knew that you couldn't go 365 days to hear your coaches and everybody within your community say, you know what, you guys lost that game. You're like, but we won the SEC championship. Like, nah, you lost the state championship. So D. Harris, leading up to that game, what was that week like for you guys, having Nick Saban there and going through that?
Y'all welcome too. You're welcome, D. 'Cause I was a part of that. You know, that's who drafted me. So
Man, listen.
Miami. So
Listen
you're
here.
welcome.
First of all, thank you. I appreciate you letting him move on to greener pastures, as we like to say in the South. But, you know, a little bit different than you guys. I would say my experience was more so the coaches were really, really amped up that week. And it was a little bit opposite of what you guys are saying, because you guys are talking a lot about how that's the week where coaches shouldn't have to get players up. But with the Nick Saban mindset and the way that he ran the ship, he was so determined to make sure that we did not get lost in the parade of this being the Iron Bowl. We were not going to be lost in the external factors and things that did not affect the game playing a part of the game. So any talk about the Iron Bowl and the fact of, you know, it's our biggest rival, all of that was out the window, because every single week from the start of the season, you know, really fourth quarter, spring ball, A-Day, training camp, we were always preparing ourselves for the last game of the season, which is the national championship. Even though this was a humongous rivalry, obviously it's the Iron Bowl, it's one of the biggest. We're going to sit here and argue that it's the biggest, but we were always so focused on just getting to that last game and playing at a level that was high enough to win the big dance. No disrespect, I am going to take a shot here, but we knew Auburn wasn't going to be the best team that we played that year. So again, as players, as coaches, we were so focused on just being ourselves, not getting lost in the hoopla of Auburn's going to town or we got to go to Jordan-Hare. We know what the environment's going to be like. We don't worry about any of that, because we knew as long as we showed up and we were at our best, we were the big brother. Auburn was always going to be the little brother. And it usually played out that way because, again, we just focused on execution, fundamentals, being our best. And usually we came out on the winning side of that.